By the power of Greyskull, I have the video blast to the past of the 30-year-old Masters of the Universe movie. Oh, and the power. I've got that too. Released August 7th, 1987, the He-Man movie was the first live-action movie based on a toy line long before Michael Bay unleashed Transformers onto the world. Now, you probably remember the Masters of the Universe movie starring Dolph Lundgren and Frank Langella as pretty magical, if Orko was the one casting the spell. Oh, but by sorceress, after making only $17 million off of a $22 million budget, this 30-year-old critical and commercial failure actually has a lot of heart, as well as a wild history that would leave Manny-Face's head spinning. But first, a little background on the sci-fi fantasy space barbarian, He-Man himself. Toy company Mattel needed a hit action figure line targeting boys in the early 1980s, and they had passed on the Star Wars license that went to Kenner. But then their Conan the Barbarian movie toy line was scuttled when they realized how violent the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie was going to be. Designers Roger Sweet and Mark Taylor, their shared work led to the 1982 He-Man line that combined elements of superheroes, Star Wars-esque space military, and the monsters and barbarians from Frank Frazetta's artwork. And while that initial line included many comics that told the story of He-Man, along with DC Comics titles, it was the 1983-85 Filmation animated series that introduced much of the mythology associated with the most powerful man in the universe. The He-Man and the Masters of the Universe show was controversial, groundbreaking, and downright ballsy. It capitalized on Ronald Reagan-era deregulation of the FCC, which allowed Mattel and Filmation to create a kids' TV show based on a pre-existing product, which is why all 80s cartoons were just commercials. This drew the ire of parent groups, even though He-Man was a firmly no-kill hero, and the series told stories with a morality lesson at the end. But whatever, the 160-episode syndicated series was the tentpole for a $2 billion empire. He-Man was in an age as golden as his beautiful skin in 1985 when talk of a movie began, but it was about to crash hard. Toy sales were about to drop off, and the Filmation show was only airing in reruns and competing with Transformers and G.I. Joe's cross-media models. So Mattel wanted to breathe new life into their franchise. Maintaining strict control over their brand, Mattel teamed with producer Ed Pressman, who had recently worked on the Conan movie. They commissioned a script from David Odell, who worked on Jim Henson's The Dark Crystal, as well as that movie stinker Supergirl. But anyhow, meanwhile, first-timer Gary Goddard was brought in as a director. Despite being his freshman effort in the director's chair, Goddard had worked on a live Conan show for Universal Studios. And, get this, he co-wrote the screenplay for a Marvel Comics movie about the X-Man Dazzler, which was going to be played by Bo Derek. With a team in place, Mattel took meetings with the big studios before entering into a 50-50 financing deal with the infamous Cannon Films, led by Menahem Golan and Yoram Globus. In 1985, Cannon had a rep in Hollywood for a barrage of inexpensive movie releases that could be turned around fast. Quality and profitability were not exactly their expertise, although they had brushes with both, and they wanted the respect of the big boys in town. And yeah, you may remember Cannon Films for being behind the classics The Happy Hooker and The Happy Hooker Goes to Washington, as well as Breakin' and Breakin' 2, Electric Boogaloo. Now, the producing pair of Golan and Globus, well, they were like Tuvar and Badra of movie making. They were masters of hype, but not the universe. They'd announce movies that were not even in production, with actors attached who never even signed up. But the scrappy B-movie underdogs were also known for dodgy financing, as they over-reported profits and would, borrow money from one of their finance productions to pay for another movie in production. Such as was the case with Masters of the Universe and 1987 Superman 4, The Quest for Peace. But let's come back to that, because that is crazier than the time He-Man pushed the moon out of orbit. With Canon Films producing, Mattel instituted the rules that He-Man could not kill or even treat others badly. And they had final say over who was cast as their muscle-bound oaf, He-Man of Eternia. They went with Dolph Lundgren, a hot new actor who played Ivan Drago in Rocky IV, and is perhaps less remembered as a guy who had a master's degree in chemical engineering and received a Fulbright scholarship from MIT. Yeah, that is all true. No doubt Lundgren looked the part of He-Man, but he also had a thick Swedish accent. Plus, this was only his second real role. The actor used an acting and dialogue coach, and he had it stated in his contract that he would get 3 chances to record and redub his lines. Plus, the cash-strapped Canon wouldn't go for a voice actor to dub Lundgren anyhow. So, that made the choice for Skeletor to be all the more important, and they found the villain in actor Frank Langella, who took the part because his son was a huge Masters of the Universe fan, and Skeletor, that was his favorite character. Langella has been vocal over the years about how much he wanted to do the movie, and how it remains one of his favorite roles. This is no doubt due to the character's tragic, almost Shakespearean arc. And it didn't hurt that he could write some of his own dialogue and deliver lines such as, "I must possess all or I possess nothing," or, "Tell me about the loneliness of good, He-Man. Is it equal to the loneliness of evil?" Or the actual Shakespeare line from Richard III, "I am not in a giving mood this day," as he disintegrates an underling. Talk about a step up from, "Why do I surround myself with bumbling idiots?" Anyhow, Langella's Skeletor is the star of the movie, unless you are a massive Christina Pickles fan, in which case she was. Interestingly, the movie version of Old Skullface was inspired by the works of comic legend Jack Kirby. In fact, much of the movie was. You could swap out Skeletor and He-Man for Thor and Doctor Doom. Or with Jack the King Kirby's New God stories with Darkseid as Skeletor, Highfather as the Sorceress, and the Cosmic Key's teleportation powers similar to boom tubes. Little of the old Star Wars was present in Masters of the Universe as well, with Ralph McQuarrie pitching in with designs that were deemed a little too faithful to the cartoon, such as costumes and sci-fi vehicles. One work of his that did make it to the final film was Skeletor's Centurion henchmen, which look pretty close to stormtroopers. Despite the similarities, the Centurions are faceless robots, but could be seen as human soldiers. They are ambiguous enough to allow our heroes to blast and slash through them with reckless, bloodless abandon, and without He-Man violating his no-kill policy. Sure, yeah, it gave He-Man an out, just like that episode of the cartoon, The Problem with Power, where he doesn't really crush that dude, which then forced him to be He-Man no more. And that scene of Skeletor sizing up his minions, totes straight out of Empire Strikes Back and the Bounty Hunters. With so much amazing design talent that had worked on the likes of Ghostbusters, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Alien, Tron, and even Cleopatra and Lawrence of Arabia, audience should have expected amazing interpretation of Castle Greyskull, Snake Mountain, and familiar characters. But the budget, that was more cringer than Mighty Battle Cat, which is incidentally why Prince Adam's fearless friend did not make the cut. Only one big interior set was constructed for the costly Greyskull throne room, and the familiar Vasquez rocks from the Twilight Zone and Star Trek stood in for a few exterior scenes. Plus, most of the action was set on Earth, without requiring Eternian landscapes. Cameos by She-Ra and the Snake Men were scrapped, although concept art for Princess Adora's costume, that was actually created. And the popular comic relief character of Orko became the locksmith Gwildor, played by Wizard of Oz actor Billy Barty. This was to avoid having a floating puppet on wires that just looked bad. Man-at-Arms, aka Duncan, and Tila, and a minor role for the Sorceress did make it into the movie. And I gotta say, 1980s TV actor John SYFY actually made for a pretty likable Duncan. But teenagers from Earth became the main POV in the movie. The future friend Courtney Cox, yeah, the girl from the Bruce Springsteen video, and Robert Duncan McNeill from Star Trek Voyager, they took He-Man and crew on their fish out of water journey. Also, Chris Pine's mom totally plays Courtney Cox's mom in the movie, so let that blow your mind for a minute. Other replacements from the cartoon included much of Skeletor's Evil Warriors gang, with only Beastman and Evil Len making the cut. So, no Merman, Trapjaw, Triclops, Faker, or even Clawful, Jitsu, Whiplash, and not even Stinkor? But I digress. I mean, not even Cobra Kai. A little sensitive. Anyhow, because he was not dealing with pre-existing animated series characters, Goddard was allowed by Mattel to have Skeletor vaporize the new character of Saurod to show how bad the villain could be. Interestingly, Saurod, along with Badass Blade and Gwildor, were the only characters to make it into toy form after the movie was released. Karg, who looks a little bit like Dog the Bounty Hunter, did get a figure a few years later. Speaking of toys, things were anything but playful for Mattel during this time. Cheap cash grabs, like Hordak's Slime Pit playset, that required parents to constantly buy new cans of slime for continued play, which also led to the toy company paying to replace slime-soiled carpets, no joke. That contributed to Mattel's sales dropping from $400 million in 1986 to $7 million in 1987 with their sixth wave of figures. So they needed a hit to sell more toys, and they needed it bad. On the Canon Films front, bankruptcy rumors, they were already plaguing the studio when they signed that 50-50 deal with Mattel. Treating their movie budgets as a communal pot led to Canon being investigated by the SEC. And of the $40 million budget Warner Brothers ponied up to Canon to make Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, the final Christopher Reeve Superman movie, probably less than $20 million went into that production. Instead, much of the money was put into Masters of the Universe. Things got so bad, Canon was actually shutting down production because the money had dried up. This was before the climactic battle between He-Man and Skeletor was filmed. So let's be clear, Canon wanted to release the movie without an ending. Goddard sacrificed $50,000 of his own unpaid salary, which Canon matched, for a one-day shoot to film the movie's finale. And the result? It is a rushed, dimly lit fight that didn't even highlight the epic Greyskull throne room that was built for sword fighting. Still, despite the movie being rushed along, there is no question that Goddard and his cast and crew poured their heart into this movie. And while it's not great, the Langella work is still super entertaining. And there is actual evolution in the character of Kevin Corrigan, who goes from selfish kid to take charge hero. And Evil Len, played by Meg Foster, begins as a lovelorn second in command, but is consistently mistreated that she abandons her Dark Lord in the end. And an unfilmed scene actually had a victorious Skeletor standing over He-Man, only to be thwarted by a spurned Evil Len. Despite tanking at the box office and the 1987 wave of Masters toys following suit, thus ending the line of figures for a very long while, Canon announced a sequel. Lundgren, he was out, as was Goddard, but the Canon hype machine continued, and the sequel would be shot simultaneously alongside a Canon adaptation of Spider-Man. Now that is a whole other story, but basically, Canon did not pay up, and Marvel pulled the plug on that one. The Mattel deal also fell through, and the He-Man sequel went away. Although, legend has it that much of 1988's Jean-Claude Van Damme movie Cyborg bears much of the plot of the planned Masters of the Universe Part 2. But while the first live-action movie based on a toy line never reached Stratos levels of sky-high success, He-Man and his heroic warriors, they returned in other iterations. And now, a new, long-gestating movie has a release date of December 2019, although no director or star are yet attached. And so, the power sword of Greyskull will once again be held aloft on the big screen by He-Man. And maybe, just maybe this time, he'll transform from Prince Adam, and we'll see Battle Cat, and Orko, and Ram Man? Until then, you have the power of Greyskull and YouTube to leave a comment below, and check out our other fan videos. And until He-Man returns, find out more in How He-Man Mastered the Universe by Brian Barry.